And we are back, and it is time for the ElseWords. This is the main discussion topic for the show, and this week it is the full details of DC's new Dark Matter line. Now, I had not really heard of this. I'm opening up a tab I already had opened. So
yeah, so what happened is last Thursday at the Diamond Retailer Summit in Chicago, DC Comics announced 5 new titles encompassing the freshly announced Dark Matter line. The books will spin out of the previously announced Dark Knights, that's without a K, Dark Knights Metal event, which is by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, and will consist of several titles by not just different creators from DC, but a lot of big name people, a lot of the kind of like leads at DC. And specifically what Jim Lee is saying is it's going to put an emphasis on artists, which they don't feel has been as emphasized over the last several years, and which Marvel, and this is probably why it was made in a statement such as this, Marvel has kind of de-emphasized artists by having multiple artists work on their books. I assume DC is too because of the bi-weekly shipping, but Marvel will do an event and not even have the same artist through the entire, not even pitch it as like they're having the same artist through the event anymore. It's just like, yeah, when we get to issue 3, it's going to switch over to this person. And when we get to issue 5, we'll find someone to fill in then. Marvel has kind of like taken it, and when you hear about some of the creators talk, they say that they write up a page and then they send it to Marvel, and then Marvel sends it to artist whoever. Artist 23 or artist ZX Alpha. It's a little weird because what a lot of people feel in the nostalgia era is that we used to have creative teams on a book for a long period of time, and that made a book must read. It made you stick with it. If you look at Perez and Wolfman and their Titans run, or Claremont with Byrne, and then later on, you know, Claremont with artists after Byrne, like Paul Smith, whoever. It still seemed like there was a time period where we were like, okay, this is who's doing this book, and we knew it, and you'd order it, and you had an understanding going in, and you followed that team more than you were just following those characters. And that's kind of gone away because what we found is that the intellectual property is more important to these companies than the people working on the books. They kind of get slapped together like IKEA furniture. If IKEA furniture came assembled, I guess it's not really right, but it does feel a little bit like particle board as opposed to like solid wood frames and stuff, and good materials and workmanship going into it, a craft. Now it's like, yeah, just fucking like retell the last event that we did 5 years ago, and we'll just slap a 2 on it, and it'll continue on. Whatever. That's a different rant. But in this regard, Lee is talking about what excites me most is the series of books takes full advantage of the talent and vision of the creative team. That's actually Dan DiDio who says that. Comics are a visual medium, and with these titles, the artists are working hand in hand with the writers and shaping the look and direction of the characters. And reaffirming the craft of making comics, we brought together a masterclass of talent. And the style and tone and visual direction of these books, with the 4 industry giants taking the lead, I feel we can bring the power and energy expected from superhero storytelling back to the page. The other portion of this that I think is a big deal, and there was an article on Bleeding Cool where they kind of asked Rob Liefeld about it, is that these are new characters. For the most part, they're new properties overall. There's a couple of things that are not. So let's get into the different individual titles.
Well, I wanted to say something real quick before this, because just sort of as an aside, and sort of I am the exception that proves the rule, and not in any way me saying I'm better than anyone else, because a lot of the books, when I got into them, it's a few of them were for the writer, but a lot of them were for the team. You know, Young Avengers was because of Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey. The Batman book with Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. Green Arrow with Jeff Lemire and Andrea Sorrentino, who I then followed them over to Marvel when they were doing the Old Man Logan story. and it quickly became this Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky with Sex Criminals. It quickly became one of these. I'm following both of them, both of these people as they go out to do these other things.
Yeah, but think about what you just said. Image has been a real key proponent of the writer artist team and the stuff that they're making together. I mean, you have your long running stuff, and Capullo started out essentially as an artist on Spawn for a number of years when Todd was no longer drawing it. But for the most part, you look at things like Saga, you look at Sex Criminals, you look at Chew, and they're two people, or a team of people that have been doing the book from beginning to end. Yeah. And that stands very differently. You feel more invested. I was talking about this earlier today, is if when all is said and done, and I have the entire backlog of Saga on my shelf, I'm going to feel very differently about that, which is also it's a story that's contained within itself. But I'm going to feel a lot different about that because of the writer and the artist doing it the whole way through than I am about a run of Nightwing or a run of Spider-Man or something where it's multiple different people. Because you might go through the phase of like, there was a point in time where Nightwing, being my favorite character, the book wasn't very good. And I kept buying it because it was fucking Nightwing. But I felt like I'm spending a couple of bucks a month on this and I'm not getting anything out of it because this guy writing it right now kind of doesn't get the character. And it's a shitty thing to say, but realistically, that's how it is. So you compare it to Preacher, you compare it to Sandman is a different thing because Sandman was almost an anthology in and of itself, but it was Neil Gaiman's voice the whole way, and you knew that when he picked an artist to work on a specific storyline or a specific arc, there was a reason why he chose them, and they stayed through the whole arc. And they might come back for other things later on, but it made a degree of sense that that whole thing was kind of brought together by these two people. You felt the collaboration, you felt the sharing between these two minds, between these two essentially geniuses in a lot of cases, making something together. That's how I am when I write stuff with Levi in mind. Is like I write stories that would only be for Levi to draw because that's what inspired me. And when Levi has me come in and write stuff that he's done, like Balyar and everything, I try to come in and treat it with the respect of what he's already established. But we have a trust together. We're friends, and that's how we work. If I was coming up with a storyline for my friend Corky, who I've definitely created with before, it's very different than what I would bring to Levi. And our relationship and how we create together is different. But that partnership is what's key, and I wouldn't take stuff that I would do with him to someone else to do because it loses a whole measure of what made it feel real and important to me.
Yeah.
That said, so I think it's also important that what we're seeing here is that we're getting new characters.
Yeah.
We're getting new ideas. And why I brought up the Rob Liefeld thing is because and someone asked, well, why does anybody give a shit about Rob Liefeld's opinion on this? Well, because Rob Liefeld, when he was a teenager, created characters like Deadpool and Cable and Domino, and holy shit, here we are 20, 30 years later, and those characters are in movies now, and they're cutting Liefeld still huge goddamn checks every month. And he's getting to go to all the premieres, and he's getting sort of a resurgence on stuff that he created when he was a kid. But also, they were still kind of considered the last original things that Marvel came up with for a long time. And certainly the last ones to take off in the way that they have. Yeah. Not a lot of characters do that. And I think when you look at it, it's like we can only tell the same Batman stories so many times, and we can only tell the same Superman stories so many times. And it's like we fucked up Superman for 5 years with New 52, and then we had to fight all this way through Rebirth to get it back to essentially a status quo again, because that's what the fans want, because people don't really want a lot of change from the characters. We have an expectation of them. But when you bring in something new, that's a potential to be the next character that people love for the next 20, 30, 50 years. And so that's the question: is when you get these creators together and the level of creators that they have on this, is that what we're going to see? Are these going to be characters that come about and we're going to love in the way of like we love Kamala Khan, you
Mhm.
know, or the Spider Gwen character, who's derivative but still is her own thing. You know, is that the potential, or is one of these the next Rocket or Groot? We'll have to find out. So we're gonna look at the creative teams on these and
Yeah.
the stuff that they're doing.
So let's start with Dark Knight's Metal Men. Now, like you said, this is knight spelled as in the
Dark
opposite of
Knight Metal,
day.
not Metal Men.
Yeah, metal. Sorry. Again, long day. Um, this is coming to us in August. This is written by Scott Snyder with art by Greg Capullo, and this is essentially the what is going to be our opening to this Dark Matter line. Um, because this is like everything else is going to be going through here, and I believe they talked about this at first or hinted at it at um I think it was like Wonder Expo or Dallas. It was either the WonderCon in Anaheim or the Dallas Comic Expo or whatever it was in Dallas that was going on at the same time. One of those panels, they had talked about this and they were hitting at it. And Greg Capullo, this is my favorite. This is one of my favorite lines in here. Said he drew Batman with two axes, holding two battle axes. So this is gonna be the kind of crazy stuff we're gonna see in this and all that. And I'm like, okay, yeah. Like 'cause I remember hearing him describe this whole thing. Like he goes, yeah. Scott said, okay, draw Batman looking really cool and holding, like maybe like an axe. And then Greg goes, what's cooler than one axe? Two
A million
axes.
axes. Oh, I'm sorry.
It was along those lines. So this is the first one, and this is probably one of the safest um pairings here because they already had success with Batman.
and it's going to involve Batman, and
Yeah.
it's going to be where the stories kind of have a conjunction. You're going to see a lot of the characters that are going to be part of this line premiere out of this. Now that creeps me out a little bit because it reminds me of when DC's tried to create new characters before, and we got events like Bloodlines, which was a just piece of hot garbage, but it did introduce the character Hitman that Garth Ennis and John McCrae did for a number of years, which was actually a really great book, considering the fact, especially that it came from Bloodlines. It also introduced a character named Anima, who had a series for at least a while, but like every other Bloodlines character just kind of came and went in that snap. It was just, wow, this is not good. This doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense. I don't like I've had a problem with a lot of the introduction of all these Inhuman characters recently because it makes it devalue the storylines for these characters. Like if I want to see a Miss Marvel cartoon series, then I have to involve her with Inhumans, and I don't know that that's necessarily what I want from that character. And then if I want to do a kid, what is the monster kid kaiju?
Oh yeah, Kid Kaiju. Yeah.
He's also an Inhuman now. And oh, look, Moon Girl's an Inhuman now. And so all these characters are all Inhumans, and I don't necessarily want them to all have to be referenced to each other if I do 3 different films or movies about them, or TV series or cartoons or whatever about them. I don't always want to have to be tied back to, and then there was the Inhumans, they were on a moon, and then the fucking Terrigon mist went across the place. It's like, it just sort of like, it's an easy in, like you don't have to explain the origin too much. But I think explaining the origin gives an individuality to characters. And so
Yeah.
if this is like every one of these people winds up getting hit with some comet made of dark metal, I don't know if that's necessarily as exciting to me as them having their own things. But when I read the individual descriptions from this, they do seem to be individualized. There's only one that really references the metal, which I believe we've gotten somewhat of a confirmation is actually nth metal, which is
Okay.
what Hawkman and Hawkwoman have, based off of the old Thanagar origins, where they came from space, and it's what gives them flight. It was also used in the Legion of Superheroes flight rings, and I think it's been used in some other stuff too in the DC history of the universe.
Yeah, which is really cool. The next one is Sideways. and it's written by Dan Didio and Justin Jordan, with art by Kenneth Rocafort. Now, this is the one, well, this is one of two that I don't really know the artist.
Justin Jordan or Kenneth Rocafort?
Kenneth Rocafort.
Kenneth Rocafort, you absolutely know, because he was working. He's the one who designed the faux Lobo, but he worked with Scott Lobdell on a lot of stuff. Like, he's got that very, very pretty artwork. He went to Marvel for a little while, but you would recognize the style. I think he's working on Titans these days. I'm not sure what book he's on at the moment, but certainly Red Hood and the Outlaws was what he was doing with Scott Lobdell in DC's New 52. You would know his stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it's probably one I didn't recognize the name, sort of deal. But this is the one I think that you mentioned that is directly references the Dark Matter. Forever changed by the events of Dark Knight Metal, a teenager struggles to live through high school as he comes in contact with dark matter and gains the superpower to teleport through the dark dimension. But each leap brings the new hero one step closer to succumbing to the allure of his new power and its dark origins. That just sounds really cool.
It sounds really cool. It sounds a little bit like Cloak, from Cloak and Dagger, and the look of the character and the listing for the character seems very Spider-Man-esque.
Yeah.
Which is not a bad thing at all. When they introduced Blue Beetle, the Jaime Reyes Blue Beetle several years ago, pre-New 52, that was exactly it. They made DC's version of Spider-Man, essentially, with a very different origin. But you could tell that's what they're going for. The teenager who gets powers and has to struggle with them, and it's always like, is he, won't he, kind of thing. That's a great storyline to steal. It's very comic book, and the design looks really good.
The next one is the Silencer. And I should say Sideways and the Silencer are both debuting in September. The Silencer is written by Dan Ebnett with art by John Romita Jr. And I mentioned this earlier. It seems like JRJR gets to pick whatever book he wants to do, because it's like it's coming to DC. He did Superman, and then it's like we didn't see him for like a quick second, and now he's doing Suicide Squad. And I'm not complaining, because I do like his artwork and all that. And it's just like they just go, hey John, what book you want to do? What book? You take your pick. We got.
I mean, John Romita Jr.'s got the pedigree that he deserves it, and it's not just because of who his dad was either. But he's earned it from the amount of years and experience and the high selling books and stuff he's done. Yeah. I didn't necessarily like his Superman. The look didn't work for me, but yeah. I think in the right book, his style can do very great things. He was always great on his Spider-Man stuff before. Since this is a book where he's creating the look for it, it'll be easier.
Yeah. He does a great job in Suicide Squad with General Zod and Amanda Waller, because here you have they made General Zod, and you might not like it, but he's this big hulking mammoth of a man, and clearly you see like he outsizes Amanda Waller, but yet with how John Romita Jr. drew Amanda Waller, you still felt like she could kick his ass. And all that.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like my Amanda Waller to be tough as fucking nails.
Yeah. So the quick thing with the Silencer, Honor Guest was the world's deadliest assassin until she traded it all for the chance at a quote unquote normal life in the suburbs, free from the constant death and destruction. But as her former life comes back to haunt her, Honor must strip away her suburban persona and protect her family as the Silencer.
Sounds a little bit Punisher. Sounds far less superhero. It could be akin to when DC a few years ago reintroduced the character Manhunter, and that character was a mother that had a son that she was protecting, but was also like, she was doing the superhero stuff because she wanted to do the superhero stuff, not really to protect her kid as much, but had a lot of good storylines with her as a parent. And as we're seeing parenting becoming an okay thing in the DC universe again, in the Super Sons books in particular. It's good that we get this variance of that idea, and we get to expand on it a little bit more. And Abnett's a great writer.
Yeah. Yeah, Abnett, who I'm blanking on what he's writing right now.
He's doing Aquaman, I think,
Aquaman. I
and
want to say
also he's doing Titans.
he's Aquaman and Titans, which are both really good reads. And he's telling such a compelling story in Aquaman, with this whole dead water thing that they got going on right now. So good. Next one is Immortal Men. This one is coming in October. Written by James Tynion the fourth, with art by Jim Lee. Born at the dawn of time, 5 siblings find that with eternal life comes eternal war. As the forces of destruction march into the modern world, they operate from the shadows, recruiting the elite against the foes who seek to bring about Armageddon. They are humankind's hope sprung eternal. They are the Immortal Men. That to me read a little bit like the A-Team.
A little bit, and I wonder, because they're 5 siblings that have eternal life. I wonder if any of them are pre-established characters, like say Vandal Savage, who's the long-lived character. Maybe not. And also, what is this book that Jim Lee is doing the art for it? Like, obviously, again, we're talking about people who are co-creating these things, who are making these stories together. But Jim Lee is one of the busiest people in comics, is one of the heads of DC Comics, along with Dan Didio. Getting Jim Lee to draw anything, and especially to try to stay on a schedule, is almost fucking impossible. But if it's the right project and it compels him to do it, then that's great. And I would like this to be the right project. And James Tynion has obviously been doing a lot of great stuff in DC, doing stuff with the Bat books and everything. Is still to me a newer writer, but has established himself in the DC family as one of their kind of like headline writers these days.
I'll add outside as well, because like one book that I really will recommend for an all ages read is his book over at Boom Studios, The Backstagers. It was a limited run series that I would love to see become a regular thing, just because that was a great story that they told. And boy, did I relate to that as a backstager myself. Not saying that the backstage is magical, but it is. The next book, also debuting in October, is Damage, written by Robert Venditti with art by Tony S. Daniel. Ethan Avery only wanted to serve his country, but promises of becoming the ultimate weapon leave the new recruit living a nightmare, cursed with the ability to unleash an unstoppable monster for 1 hour at a time. Ethan only wants to live out his life in peace, but if he can tame the monster inside, it might just be able to do more good for the country than Ethan ever expected. This to me screams a little bit like
Hulk,
a little bit like Hulk or Ghost Rider, especially the Robbie Reyes Ghost Rider, with how they're doing him right now.
The 1 hour thing kind of reminds me of Dial H for Hero.
Yeah.
Which the characters used to be limited to an hour when they would turn into something. Damage is a character name that's been used several times over in the DC universe, but the books never seem to take off. Tony S. Daniel, I want to say, did a beastly hulking character for Image back in the day. I don't know. I could be wrong on that. I might be remembering something else, but it seems like something that he had done before. And certainly you look at his art style and how he's drawn this character, and it works. But it does feel like we're getting a Spider-Man and we're getting a Hulk.
Yeah. And then the final book from this is The New Challengers. This one is coming in December. It is written by Scott Snyder with art by Andy Kubert. Characters live on borrowed time, running from death towards the greatest mysteries, wonders, and terrors of the universe. It's a new cast, new mission, but in conversation with the history and greatness of the original challengers of the unknown. The story starts with challengers mounting or Challengers Mountain returning after having been missing for years, and only gets wilder from there. Now, I know nothing of Challengers.
Challengers of the Unknown is essentially DC's Fantastic Four.
Nice.
That kind of like 60s sci-fi-ish family type group. There's been a few stabs at it, but it's certainly in a way that could be seen as would lend itself to the Kirby-esque type of stories and characters, because kind of ripped off of it. But it's one of those things that every time they try to bring it back, I think they try to play the old-timey feel, and that might be what holds people back from it. I've always loved the name. I stole the name when I was a kid, and I had a superhero group that was called Challengers of the Unknown. I think I had heard of it, but I didn't know what it came from, and I was just like, that's the greatest name ever. But I think Snyder having the appeal for it and wanting to do it and having it kind of in his pocket, just waiting for the opportunity, this is probably the right time to do it. It is interesting because it's the only thing out of these, other than Dark Knight's Metal and what I'm only sort of maybe guessing possibly could happen with Immortal Men. It's the only one of these that isn't a completely new concept.
Yeah.
But it's a new version of a concept that also, again, hasn't been approached for a long time.
Yeah. Okay. So, quick question: out of all 6 of these, which are you most excited for?
That is really hard to say. I mean, if you're going off of art and just the style of it, and maybe even what the storyline is, Sideways seems more like a character that I would be into, you know, because he's the young guy. He probably seems the most grounded to me for having a supernatural power. It just seems like he's more of the relatable character for me. After that, it would probably be New Challengers, because, like I said, I have some affection for the original, and I'd like to see what Snyder, being Snyder, what he could do with it. And then out of the other new concepts, Silencer is probably the third one. Not even necessarily for the creative team, but just because, again, a woman that's trying to protect her family from her hidden past is something that I can instantly jump into. But they all look pretty good. Nothing here is like, oh, that just looks like garbage or anything, because you can't. Not with these teams, not with these creators. They're all stellar creators. They're all top of their game. One thing that has been noted is that no women in any of the creative teams at this time. But I think that is something that they have in the works. So these are not all the titles that are going to come from the Dark Matter line. This is just the initial lineup of these. And I'd wonder if some of them are maybe not even ongoing series, because, again, someone like Jim Lee, I don't know, can stay on that kind of schedule for very long. Unless he sacrifices his spot and gives it to somebody else to take over, which sort of ruins the idea of having creative team working in tandem together. It may be that this is something that is the jumping off point, and the Dark Matter line grows much in the way that Gerard Way's line has grown from being the initial titles that we first saw, to some other things getting added down the road.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that is going to wrap it up here for us.